The evening sun cast long shadows across Chicago's busy streets as Mr. Chen drove his sleek Rolls-Royce through downtown. As one of the world's most successful tech entrepreneurs, he was used to seeing life through tinted windows, his mind usually occupied with stock prices and board meetings. But something caught his eye that made him forget all about his upcoming business dinner. 4 children huddled together near a convenience store, sharing what looked like a single sandwich between them. At first, he wasn't sure why they caught his attention. He'd seen homeless people before, though it always pained him. But as his car stopped at a red light, he found himself staring at their faces, particularly their eyes. "Stop the car," he said suddenly, surprising his driver. "Pull over right here." His driver looked concerned. "Sir, your dinner meeting starts in 20 minutes. "I said stop the car," Mr. Chen repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. Something about those children's features haunted him. They had the same unique jade-green eyes he saw in the mirror every morning, the same distinctive cheekbones that had been passed down through generations of his family. As he stepped out of the car, his expensive Italian shoes hitting the pavement, several passers-by turned to stare. It wasn't every day they saw a billionaire in a 3-piece suit approaching homeless children on the street. The youngest child, a little girl no more than 8, noticed him first and tugged at her older brother's sleeve. The oldest two appeared to be twins, around 12 years old, with the same determined set to their jaws that he recognized from his own childhood photos. The boy stepped slightly in front of his siblings, protective, reminding Mr. Chen of himself when he'd been young and responsible for looking after his younger brother. "Are you kids all right?" he asked, keeping his distance to avoid frightening them. "Where are your parents?" The older boy studied him suspiciously, but the little girl's eyes widened with recognition. "You're the man from the magazine," she exclaimed. "The one Mom used to." "Quiet," the older boy cut her off, but Mr. Chen had already heard enough to make his heart skip a beat. "Your mom?" he asked gently. "Would you tell me about her?" The third child, a boy who looked about 10, pulled something from his worn backpack, a crumpled photograph protected inside a plastic bag. With trembling hands, he held it out. Mr. Chen's world stopped spinning as he looked at the image. There she was, Lai Wei, the brilliant computer science student he dated 15 years ago when he was still struggling to launch his first startup. She was smiling at the camera, her arms around 2 small children he now realized were the twins standing before him. "She passed away 6 months ago," the older girl twin said quietly, her voice carrying the same musical quality as her mother's. "We've been staying at shelters, but they keep splitting us up. We won't let them separate us." Mr. Chen felt like he couldn't breathe. The timing, their age, their features, it all added up to a truth that shook him to his core. He looked at these 4 children, really looked at them, and saw pieces of himself staring back. The way the older boy stood, shoulders squared against the world. The little girl's curious tilt of the head. The quiet determination in the middle boy's eyes. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, probably his assistant wondering why he wasn't at the dinner yet. For the first time in his life, Mr. Chen ignored it completely. "Would you?" He had to clear his throat to continue. "Would you kids like to get something proper to eat? We could talk somewhere comfortable, and you can tell me everything about your mom." The older boy started to shake his head, but the little girl spoke up again. "Mom always said we should trust our instincts about people. And she kept all those articles about you and your pictures." The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication that only twins seem to share. Finally, the boy nodded slowly. As Mr. Chen guided them toward his car, his driver already opening the doors, he felt like he was in a dream. Here he was, one of the richest men in the world, who thought he had everything figured out, about to have dinner with 4 homeless children who might just be his own. His phone buzzed again. The billion-dollar deal he was supposed to be discussing over dinner could wait. For the first time in his life, he had found something far more valuable than money could buy. A piece of his past that might just change his entire future. The upscale restaurant's private dining room felt like another world compared to where the children had been just an hour before. The twins, Mi and Jun, sat close together on one side of the table, while their younger brother Kai and little sister Lin sat on the other side. They looked both amazed and uncomfortable surrounded by the elegant decor and attentive waitstaff. Mr. Chen had called ahead to have the kitchen prepare a variety of child-friendly dishes. As plates of steaming noodles, dumplings, and fresh vegetables arrived, he noticed how the children tried to maintain their manners despite their obvious hunger. "Please, eat as much as you'd like," he said softly, his heart aching as he watched Lin's eyes grow wide at the sight of so much food. "We can talk while we eat." As the children began to eat, their story slowly unfolded. Their mother, Li Wei, had worked as a programmer while raising them alone. She'd never told them much about their father, only that he was a kind and brilliant man who had big dreams. She kept articles about Mr. Chen's success tucked away in a special box, along with old photographs and letters she'd never sent. "Mom worked really hard," May said, carefully wiping her mouth with a napkin. "She taught coding classes on weekends to earn extra money for our school fees." Jun nodded, protective arms still around his twin sister. "She was amazing. She could fix any computer problem. People used to bring their laptops to our apartment all the time, asking for her help." Mr. Chen felt a lump in his throat. That was exactly like the Lai Wei he remembered. Brilliant, hardworking, always helping others. "What happened?" he asked gently. The children grew quiet. Kai, who had barely spoken until now, answered in a low voice. "She got sick last year, really sick. The doctors said it was cancer." He pushed his plate away, his appetite suddenly gone. "She tried to keep working, but—" Lin climbed down from her chair and walked around the table to Mr. Chen, surprising everyone. She pulled something else from the worn backpack they carried, a small wooden box with intricate carvings. "This was Mom's special box," she said. "She told us if anything ever happened to her, we should keep it safe." With trembling hands, Mr. Chen opened the box. Inside were newspaper clippings about his company's success, photographs from their college days, and a stack of unsent letters. Each one began the same way: "Dear Huan." His birth name. The name he'd used before anglicizing it for business purposes. The name only Lai Wei had ever called him. "After Mom," Jun's voice cracked slightly. "After she was gone, they wanted to put us in different foster homes. We ran away the first night. We promised Mom we'd stay together." "We've been careful," May added quickly, as if afraid they were in trouble. "We take turns going to the library to keep up with our schoolwork. Lin's really good at math, and Kai helps her with reading." Mr. Chen listened, his heart breaking and swelling at the same time. These children, his children, had faced so much hardship, yet they'd stayed together, stayed strong, kept studying despite everything. They had Li Wei's determination, and he realized with growing certainty his own resilience. "There's something in those letters," he said carefully, "that your mother wanted to tell me. Something very important." He looked at each child in turn, seeing himself in their features more clearly with each passing moment. I think I'm your father." The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of unspoken truths. Lin, still standing beside him, reached out and touched his hand. "That's what Mom said. She said our dad loved her once, and that he'd love us too if he knew about us. But she said he was busy changing the world with his computers." Kai looked up sharply. "Is that true? Did you love our mom?" Mr. Chen felt tears welling up in his eyes, something that hadn't happened since his own mother's passing years ago. "Very much," he answered honestly. "She was the smartest person I ever knew. And if I had known about you—" He had to pause to steady his voice. "If I had known about you, I would have been there, every day." "Can you prove it?" Jun asked, ever protective. "How do we know you're really our dad?" Mr. Chen pulled out his phone and quickly brought up an old photo he'd kept buried in a private folder. It showed him and Lai Wei at a campus cafe, both laughing as they worked on laptops covered in stickers. "This was taken the day we met. Your mother was helping me debug my first attempt at a major program. She found the error in minutes when I'd been stuck for days." The twins leaned forward to look at the photo, their expressions softening. May touched the screen gently. "Mom's wearing the jade pendant she always wore. She said it was good luck." "I gave her that pendant," Mr. Chen said softly. "It belonged to my grandmother." Lin tugged at his sleeve. "Does this mean you're going to help us stay together?" Mr. Chen looked at these 4 remarkable children. Children who had survived loss and hardship, who had protected each other, who had their mother's brilliance and his determination. He thought of his massive empty house, his lonely success, all the years he'd missed. No one will ever separate you again, he promised. But we should do this properly. Tomorrow, we'll arrange for DNA tests to make everything legal and clear. Tonight, though, he looked around at their tired faces. Tonight, I think we all need a safe place to rest and time to get to know each other. Would you be willing to trust me that far? The children looked at each other, having another one of those silent conversations that siblings seem to master. Finally, Jun spoke for all of them. Mom trusted you, and she was always right about people. As they left the restaurant together, Mr. Chen realized that his life would never be the same. The business empire he built suddenly seemed small compared to the responsibility and the joy of being a father to these 4 extraordinary children. The DNA test results arrived on a sunny Tuesday morning, confirming what Mr. Chen's heart already knew. He was the father of all 4 children. As he sat in his home office, staring at the official documents, the sound of childish laughter drifted in from the garden. It had been just 2 weeks, but already his massive house felt more alive than it had in all the years he'd lived there. His phone buzzed for the 100th time that morning. His fiancée, Miss John, was not taking the news well. "This is a disaster," her message read. "The media is having a field day. You need to get ahead of this story." She wasn't wrong about the media attention. Tech billionaire discovers secret family had become the headline of the week. His company's stock had dropped 5 points when the news first broke, though it was already starting to recover. His PR team was working overtime, but Mr. Chen found he cared less and less about the public's reaction with each passing day. A soft knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. It was May, the older of the twins, holding a tablet. "The business channels are talking about you again," she said, her voice worried. "They're saying bad things about Mom." Mr. Chen gestured for her to come sit beside him. "People often talk about things they don't understand," he said gently. "Your mother was an amazing woman who raised 4 incredible children. Nothing anyone says can change that." May nodded, but still looked troubled. "Miss Jum called us gold diggers when she thought we couldn't hear her. I looked it up. It means she thinks we only want your money." Mr. Chen felt his jaw tighten. He'd been trying to help Miss Jung adjust to the situation, but her thinly veiled hostility toward the children was becoming impossible to ignore. "You don't need to worry about Miss Jung," he said firmly. "This is your home now." Just then, Lin burst into the office, her hair flying wild. "Brother, you have to come quick. Jun's teaching Kai to do backflips in the garden." Mr. Chen jumped up, parental instincts he didn't even know he had kicking in. No backflips without proper supervision. He called out, hurrying after his youngest daughter. He found Jun and Kai in the garden, thankfully not doing backflips, but rather attempting to build what looked like a makeshift computer from old parts they'd found in the house. Their faces were lit with the same intense concentration he often saw in the mirror during late-night coding sessions. "We're trying to fix it," Kai explained excitedly. "Mom taught us about computer repair. She said understanding how things work is the first step to making them better." Mr. Chen felt his throat tighten. Every day, the children revealed new ways in which Li Wei had prepared them for life, new pieces of her wisdom that she passed on. He sat down on the grass beside them, not caring about his expensive suit. "Would you like me to show you how to upgrade the processor?" he offered. The boys' eyes lit up, and soon they were deep in conversation about computer components. Mr. Chen found himself explaining the same concepts Li Wei had taught him years ago, watching his son's quick minds grasp each new idea. Later that evening, as they all sat down to dinner, a new routine Mr. Chen insisted on, his phone buzzed again. Miss Jun was demanding to know when he would sort out this mess and return to their normal life. Looking at his children around the table, Mr. Chen realized their normal life was exactly what he'd been missing all along. "I have something to tell you all," he said, putting his phone away. "I've decided to step back from being CEO of the company." 4 pairs of green eyes stared at him in surprise. "But that's your whole life," Jun protested. "You built that company from nothing." Mr. Chen smiled. "The company was my whole life because I didn't know what I was missing. Now I do. I'll still be chairman of the board, but I'm promoting my deputy to CEO. That way, I can be home for dinner every night, help with homework, and maybe even learn how to be a proper father." Lin got up from her chair and hugged him, something she'd been doing more frequently lately. The others looked uncertain but hopeful. "What about Miss Zhang?" May asked quietly. Mr. Chen took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a very important conversation with her tonight. Some things are more precious than business success or social status. Family is one of them." That night, after the children were asleep, Mr. Chen sat in his office again, composing 2 important emails. The first was to his board of directors, announcing his transition to chairman. The second was to Miss Zhang, ending their engagement. Both decisions felt right in a way few things had since finding his children. As he walked through the quiet house doing one last check on his sleeping children, another new habit he'd developed. He paused at each doorway. The twins had pushed their beds together, still more comfortable sleeping near each other. Kai had fallen asleep with a computer manual open on his chest. Lin had somehow convinced the housekeeper to string fairy lights around her room. His phone buzzed one last time, Miss Zhang again, but he turned it off without reading the message. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the media, the company transition, the endless adjustments of becoming a family. But for now, in the quiet of night, Mr. Chen finally felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Money could buy a lot of things, but it couldn't buy parenting skills. Mr. Chen learned this lesson the hard way one morning when he found Lin crying over her breakfast cereal. He'd hired the best chef in the city, but all his youngest daughter wanted was the simple rice porridge her mother used to make. "I don't know how to make it exactly like Mom did," Lin sniffled, pushing away the fancy French toast. "She always added extra ginger when I wasn't feeling well." Mr. Chen dismissed the chef for the morning and rolled up his sleeves. "Then we'll learn together," he said, pulling up a recipe on his tablet. "Your mom taught me a few things about cooking back in college. I was terrible at it, but she never gave up on me." That morning, they made 3 different attempts at rice porridge. The first was too watery, the second too thick, but the third, with Lin carefully measuring the ginger, was just right. The kitchen was a mess, but Lin's smile made it worth it. The twins presented different challenges. Jun still kept his distance, watching Mr. Chen with careful eyes that seemed too old for his 12 years. One afternoon, during a parent-teacher meeting at their new school, Jun's math teacher mentioned he was struggling to catch up after missing so many months. "I can hire the best tutors," Mr. Chen offered that evening, but Jun shook his head. "Mom always said we should figure things out ourselves first," Jun replied stiffly. "She said that's how we really learn." Mr. Chen thought about this, remembering how Lei Wei had taught him to solve coding problems. "What if we figured it out together?" he suggested. "No tutors, just you and me. Your mom was right. Working through problems makes us stronger." That became their routine. Every evening after dinner, father and son sat together with math homework. Sometimes they struggled, sometimes they succeeded, but slowly, the wall between them began to crack. May was easier to talk to, but she carried her own burdens. He found her one day organizing everyone's clothes, checking for holes, just as she'd done during their months on the street. "We have plenty of new clothes now," he said gently. "You don't need to worry about that anymore." "I know," she said, but kept folding. I need to make sure everyone's taken care of. Mom always said that's what family does." Mr. Chen sat down beside her. "You're right, that is what family does. But you're 12, May. Let me do the worrying for a while." She looked up at him, her eyes, so much like his own, filling with tears. "But what if you leave too?" He pulled her into a hug, his heart breaking. "Never," he promised. "I missed too much time already. I'm not going anywhere." Kai, the quiet middle child, surprised everyone by having the hardest time adjusting. He was caught trying to sneak food into his room, storing it under his bed. A habit from their homeless days. Instead of scolding him, Mr. Chen helped him clean out the hidden stash. "Let's make a deal," he suggested. "We'll keep a special drawer in the kitchen just for your snacks. You can take what you want, whenever you want. No need to hide." "Really?" Kai asked, suspicious but hopeful. "Really? And maybe you can help me stock it? You know what everyone likes better than I do." That became their weekend routine. Father and son would visit the grocery store together, picking out snacks for the whole family. Kai slowly stopped hiding food, though Mr. Chen noticed he still kept the drawer carefully filled. The biggest challenge came during their first family holiday. Mr. Chen had planned an elaborate trip to Disney World. complete with VIP passes and luxury accommodations. But the night before they were supposed to leave, he found all 4 children huddled together in Lynn's room, looking at old photos on Lynn's tablet. "Mom loved the city park," Lynn was saying. "Remember how she used to pack picnics and we'd spend all day there on holidays?" Mr. Chen quietly cancelled the Disney trip. The next morning, he packed a simple picnic, including their now-perfected rice porridge, and took them to the same park their mother had loved. They spent the day flying kites, feeding ducks, and sharing stories about Lai Wei. That evening, as they sat on their picnic blanket watching the sunset, Jun finally asked the question Mr. Chen had been dreading: "Why didn't you ever look for us?" The easy answer would have been to blame his busy schedule, his assistants who filtered his messages, the chaos of building his company. Instead, he told the truth. "I was afraid," he admitted. "After your mom and I lost touch, I threw myself into work because it was easier than dealing with the pain. I told myself I was too busy for a family, too focused on success. But really, I was just scared of letting anyone get close enough to hurt me again." He looked at each of his children in turn. "I was wrong. Success means nothing without people to share it with. I'm sorry it took me so long to learn that." Jun nodded slowly, then did something he'd never done before. He leaned against his father's shoulder. One by one, the other children joined them, forming a tight circle as the sky turned purple and gold. "Mom would have liked this," May said softly. "She always said the best things in life are free." Mr. Chen looked at his children, thinking about all the business deals and board meetings he missed for, all the times he'd chosen work over connection. "Your mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was the wisest person I've ever known." That night marked a turning point. They were still learning, still adjusting, still healing. But they were doing it together as a family. And that, Mr. Chen realized, was worth more than all his billions combined. The old email server was being decommissioned, part of the company's digital upgrade that Mr. Chen had put in motion years ago. He sat in his home office late one night, sorting through archived messages that needed to be transferred. That's when he found it, a folder marked personal that he'd never seen before. His coffee grew cold as he read through message after message from Li Wei, each one caught by his former assistant's aggressive filtering system. The timestamps make his hands shake. The first message was sent just weeks after they'd lost touch, when his startup was beginning to take off. "I have something important to tell you," she had written. "Please call me when you can." More messages followed, growing more urgent. "The doctor confirmed it today. I'm carrying twins. I know you're busy changing the world, but please call me. 4 months now. They're healthy. The doctor says they both have strong heartbeats. I see your company is doing well. I'm happy for you. The babies are due in 2 months. I still hope you'll call." Mr. Chen had to stop reading, his vision blurring with tears. He remembered those months, how busy he'd been, how focused on his growing company. His assistant at the time, Mrs. Wu, had been hired specifically to protect his time and energy. She'd done her job too well. He found more messages in the system, sent years later. Messages about Kai's birth, about Lin. Each one filtered, filed away, never reaching him. Lai Wei had tried to reach him for years before finally giving up. The sound of shuffling feet made him look up. Jun stood in the doorway in his pajamas, looking concerned. "Aren't you okay? I saw your light on." Mr. Chen wiped his eyes quickly, but not quick enough. Jun came closer, glancing at the computer screen. "Those are from Mom." "Yes," Mr. Chen said softly. "She tried to tell me about you. All of you. For years." Jun read a few lines, his face unreadable. "Why didn't you see these before?" Mr. Chen opened another file, Mrs. Wu's filtering rules. "My assistant thought she was protecting me. She marked your mother's email address as spam, filtered any message with personal content. She thought." He had to take a deep breath. "She thought your mother was just after my money." "But you fired her, right?" Jun's voice was sharp. "When you found out." "She retired 5 years ago," Mr. Chen said quietly. "Before I knew any of this. But you're right, I should have paid more attention. I should have checked. I was so focused on building the company, I let other people control too much of my life." They sat in silence for a moment, both reading through the messages. Then Jun pointed to one from 14 years ago. "She sent you a picture of me and May when we were babies." Mr. Chen clicked on the attachment. The photo showed two tiny babies sleeping peacefully, their little faces serene. "You both had your mother's nose," he said softly. "But my eyes, even then." "Mom kept this picture by her bed," Jun said. "She said it was taken on our first day home from the hospital." He hesitated, then added, "She never said anything bad about you, you know, even when things were really hard. She just said you were following your dreams, and that was important too." Fresh tears rolled down Mr. Chen's cheeks. "Your mother was a better person than I ever deserved." "Maybe," Jun said thoughtfully, "but you're trying now. Mom would have liked that." They continued reading together, finding messages that traced the children's early years. Lai Wei had documented everything: first steps, first words, first days of school. She'd sent it all to him, never knowing her messages were being blocked. Around midnight, Mei appeared too, followed by Kai and Lin. Soon all five of them were crowded around the computer, reading through their own history. "Look," Lin pointed excitedly. "Mom wrote about my first tooth." "And here's when Kai won the science fair," Mei added. "She never stopped trying to include you," Jun said quietly to his father, "even when you didn't respond." Mr. Chen looked at his children's faces, illuminated by the computer screen in the dark office. "I promise you," he said, his voice firm despite his tears, "I will spend the rest of my life making up for these lost years." That weekend, Mr. Chen had his tech team recover every email, every photo, every attempt at contact that Li Wei had made over the years. He created digital albums for each child, filling them with their mother's words and pictures. It wasn't the same as having been there, but it was a bridge between their past and present. He also made another decision. The next morning, he gathered his children in the garden, their favorite place for family meetings now. "I want to create a scholarship," he announced. "The Lai Wei Memorial Scholarship for single parents studying computer science. Your mother worked so hard to raise you and keep up with her programming skills. I want to help other parents do the same." The children were quiet for a moment, then Mei spoke up. "Could we help choose who gets it? Mom would have liked that. Us helping other families." "Of course," Mr. Chen smiled. "It will be a family project." As they began discussing details, Mr. Chen watched his children's faces light up with ideas. They had their mother's compassion, her desire to help others. The scholarship wouldn't change the past, but it would honor Li Wei's memory by helping future families avoid the struggles she'd faced. Later that night, as Mr. Chen tucked Lin into bed, she asked, "Do you think Mom can see us? Do you think she knows we're okay now?" Mr. Chen smoothed her hair back, just as Li Wei had described doing in one of her emails. "I think your mom never stopped watching over you," he said softly. "And I think she led me to find you when you needed me most." It started with a cough. At first, no one thought much of it. Lin had always been prone to catching colds, according to the medical records they'd recovered. But when her fever spiked one night, Mr. Chen felt a fear he'd never known before. "My chest hurts," Lin whimpered as he carried her to the car. The other children insisted on coming along, piling into the back seat still in their pajamas. Jun held Lin's hand the whole way to the hospital, while Mei kept checking her forehead, just like their mother used to do. The emergency room was bright and cold. Despite Mr. Chen's name and wealth, they still had to wait as doctors ran tests. He paced the waiting room, feeling completely helpless. All his money, all his influence, meant nothing while they waited for answers. "She'll be okay," Kai said quietly, though his face was pale with worry. Mom always said Lin was stronger than she looked. The doctor's diagnosis came like a punch to the gut: severe pneumonia, complicated by an underlying heart condition that had gone undetected. Lin needed immediate surgery. "There are risks," the doctor explained gently, "but without the operation." "Do whatever it takes," Mr. Chen interrupted, gripping the back of a chair to stay steady. "Money is no object." As they prepped Lin for surgery, she looked so small in the hospital bed. "I'm scared," she whispered when Mr. Chen leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I know, sweetheart," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "But you're not alone. We're all right here with you." "Mom too?" Lin asked, her eyes glassy with fever. Mr. Chen felt tears threatening to fall. "Yes, your mom too. She's watching over you, just like always." The wait during surgery was excruciating. Mr. Chen sat with his other children in the private waiting room, all of them too worried to sleep despite the late hour. That's when John finally opened up about the night their mother died. It was kind of like this, he said, staring at his hands. Waiting in a hospital, but we were alone then. The social worker kept trying to separate us, saying we needed to go to different foster homes. So we ran away as soon as Mom. His voice cracked. May picked up the story. We promised her we'd stay together. She made us promise, right before. She said family was the most important thing. Mr. Chen pulled both twins into a hug, and Kai scooted closer to join them. Your mother was right, he said. Family is everything, and we're going to get through this together. Hours passed. Kai fell asleep against his father's shoulder. May kept reorganizing the contents of her purse, a nervous habit she developed during their homeless months. John walked laps around the waiting room, counting his steps under his breath. Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in her scrubs. The operation was successful, she announced, and the whole family seemed to exhale at once. She's strong, your daughter. She'll need time to recover, but she should make a full recovery. When they were allowed to see Lynn in recovery, she was groggy but smiling. Did you all stay? She asked, her voice scratchy. Of course we stayed, John said, trying to sound tough despite his red-rimmed eyes. We're family. Over the next week, Lynn's hospital room became their temporary home. Mr. Chen worked remotely from a chair by her bed, and the children did their schoolwork in the room's corners. The hospital staff tried to enforce visiting hours, but quickly gave up. This family clearly wasn't going to be separated. One night, when Lynn was feeling better and the younger kids were asleep on the room's small sofa, John approached his father with a box he'd brought from home. I found Mom's old diary, he said quietly. I think you should read this part. He opened to a marked page and handed it over. The entry was from just after Lynn was born. Today, my youngest daughter smiled for the first time. She has her father's smile, just like her siblings. Sometimes I see so much of him in them that it hurts, but then I remember they have the best parts of both of us. His determination, my patience. His intelligence, my creativity. They are the perfect blend of two people who once loved each other very much. Even if he never knows about them, I see him in every smile, every achievement, every small victory. And I know that love never really goes away, it just takes new forms. Mr. Chen had to stop reading, his vision too blurry to continue. John sat beside him, offering a tissue. Mom used to read us parts of her diary sometimes, John said. She wanted us to know we were born from love, even if we couldn't be together as a family. But now we are together. And when Lynn got sick, well, I thought you should know that Mom would be happy. Not about Lynn being sick, but about how we're all here for her. I wish your mother could see this, Mr. Chen said softly. See all of us together finally. Maybe she can, John replied. She always said love finds a way. I didn't really understand what she meant before, but I think I do now. When Lynn was finally released from the hospital, they all went home together. That night, Mr. Chen tucked each child into bed, something he'd started doing during their first weeks together and now couldn't imagine skipping. Dad. Lynn called as he was about to leave her room. Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you found us, she said sleepily, even if it took a long time. Mr. Chen felt his heart swell. I'm glad I found you too, he whispered. More than you'll ever know. 6 months had passed since Mr. Chen first spotted his children on that street corner, though it felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. The massive house that had once echoed with emptiness now buzzed with life and laughter. He stood in the doorway of the newly built family room, watching his children prepare for their big presentation. They'd insisted on handling everything themselves for the first Li Wei Memorial Scholarship ceremony, from selecting the recipients to planning the event. The chairs need to be angled more toward the screen, May directed, her mother's natural leadership showing through. She held a tablet with their carefully planned layout, checking everything twice. John and Kai were setting up the audio-visual equipment, arguing good-naturedly about the best way to connect everything. Their technical skills had flourished over the past months, with both boys now taking advanced programming classes after school. Lynn, fully recovered from her surgery, danced between everyone, placing handwritten name cards on each chair. She'd insisted on writing them herself, saying it was more personal that way. Remember when we used to dream about having a real home again? Kai asked suddenly, pausing in his work. Back when we were. He trailed off, still finding it hard to talk about their time on the streets. Back when we had nothing but each other, Jun finished for him. But that wasn't nothing. Mom always said family was everything. Mr. Chen's heart swelled as he watched them work together. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. There had been nightmares, arguments, moments of doubt and fear. But there had also been countless moments of joy, of connection, of healing. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first scholarship recipients. 3 single parents, each with their children, had been chosen for the inaugural awards. The ceremony was being kept small and personal, just as the children had wanted. "Welcome," Mr. Chen greeted them warmly. "My children have been very excited to meet you." One of the recipients, a mother of 2, had tears in her eyes. "I still can't believe this is real," she said. "The scholarship will change everything for us." "That's exactly what Mom would have wanted," Lin said, appearing beside her father to hand the woman a name card. "She always said education could change the world." The small ceremony was nothing like the grand corporate events Mr. Chen had hosted in the past, but it was far more meaningful. Each of his children had a role to play. Mi gave a speech about their mother's dedication to education and family. Jun and Kai presented a video they'd created, showing how the scholarship would help each family. Lin handed out framed certificates, adding a hand-drawn heart to each one. When it was Mr. Chen's turn to speak, he found himself struggling to keep his composure. "6 months ago," he began, "I thought I had everything money could buy. But I was missing the most important thing of all, family. My late wife, Li Wei, understood this truth. She raised our children with love, wisdom, and an unwavering belief in the power of education." He paused, looking at his children's proud faces. "This scholarship is more than financial aid. It's a promise to honor Li Wei's legacy by helping other families stay together, grow together, and achieve their dreams together. Because, as my children taught me, success isn't measured in dollars or business deals, it's measured in moments of connection, in dreams shared, in love given and received." After the ceremony, as they helped the families load their cars with gift baskets Mai had insisted on preparing, one of the recipient's children tugged on Mr. Chen's sleeve. "Is it true?" the little boy asked. "Were your kids really homeless before?" "We were," Jun answered before his father could, kneeling down to the boy's level. "But we had something really important. We had each other. And now we want to help other families stay together too." That evening, after everything was cleaned up, the family gathered in their favorite spot, the garden where they'd spent so many hours sharing stories and healing together. The garden now featured a small memorial fountain dedicated to Li Wei, with her favorite quote engraved on it, "Love finds a way." "Do you think we made Mom proud today?" Lin asked, leaning against her father's shoulder. "I know we did," Mai answered. "Remember how she used to say that helping others was the best way to help ourselves?" "She was right about that," Kai added. "I felt really good watching those families today. Like we're turning something sad into something happy." Mr. Chen looked at each of his children, marveling at how far they'd come. Jun was finally comfortable enough to share his feelings openly. Mai had learned to let go of some of her need to control everything. Kai no longer hoarded food under his bed. And Lin's laughter, once rare, now filled the house daily. "Your mother," he said softly, "would be amazed by all of you, not just for today, but for everything. Your strength, your compassion, your ability to love even after everything you've been through. She'd be proud of you too, Dad," Jun said, using the word that had once felt so foreign to him. "You changed your whole life for us." "No," Mr. Chen corrected gently. "I changed my life because of you. You showed me what really matters. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy belonging. Success is impressive, but it can't hug you when you're scared. I thought I was rescuing you that day on the street, but the truth is, you rescued me." As the sun set over their garden, casting long shadows across Li Wei's fountain, the family sat together in comfortable silence. They'd come so far from that chance encounter on a street corner, yet in many ways, their journey was just beginning. "So," Lin said finally, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "since the scholarship ceremony went so well, can we start planning the summer camp for kids we were talking about?" Mr. Chen laughed, pulling her close. "One project at a time, sweetheart. But with this family, I have a feeling anything is possible. And as his children began excitedly discussing their next big idea, Mr. Chen silently thanked Li Wei for the incredible gift she'd given him, not just their children, but the chance to discover what true wealth really meant.